North Pole Hotline.
Help! My in-laws are hosting Thanksgiving, and we're bringing the dressing.
You mean stuffing?
No, dressing. I need cute outfits for everyone.
Get to Old Navy.
Old Navy?
Yep, Old Navy's kicking off the holidays with stylish denim, velvet tops, the season's best dresses, and 40% off your entire purchase now through Tuesday.
40% off? We'll be stuffing our shopping bags full.
And don't forget colorful sweaters and amazing outerwear, too. You can even buy online and pick up in store for free.
Ooh, I love an all-you-can-wear buffet.
Holiday your heart out at Old Navy and OldNavy.com. Valid 11/18 to 11/20. Exclusions apply. See stores for details.
Well, for some reason, my music isn't coming out. So, aloha and welcome to Aquarian Radio at aquarianradio.com. I'm your host, Janet Karen Lesson, with my co-host, Karen Christine Patrick. And today we interview nuclear physicist-lecturer Stanton T. Friedman, who received his BS and MSc degrees in physics from the University of Chicago in 1955 and 56. He was employed for 14 years as a nuclear physicist by such companies as GE, GM, Westinghouse, TRW Systems, Aerojet General Nucleonics, and McDonnell Douglas, working in such highly advanced eventually canceled programs as nuclear aircraft, fission and fusion, rockets, and various compact nuclear power plants for space and terrestrial applications. He became interested in UFOs in 1958, and since 1967 has lectured about them in at more than 600 colleges and 100 professional groups in all 50 U.S. states, 10 Canadian provinces, and 18 other countries, in addition to various nuclear consulting efforts. And he's published more than 90 UFO papers and has appeared on hundreds of radio and TV programs, including Larry King, and in 2007 and twice in 2008. And he's been in many, many, many documentaries. He's the original civilian investigator of the Roswell Incident and co-authored Crash at Corona, the definitive study of the Roswell Incident. Top Secret MAJIC is his controversial book about the Majestic 12 groups established in 1947 to deal with alien technology, was published in 1996 and went through 6 printings. An expanded new edition was published in 2005, and Stan was presented with a Lifetime UFO Achievement Award in Leeds, England, in 2002 by UFO Magazine of the UK. He is co-authored with Kathleen Marden, who is Betty Hill's niece, of a book in 2007 called Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. The City of Fredericton, New Brunswick, declared August 27, 2007, Stanton Friedman Day. His book, Flying Saucers and Science, was published in June 2008. And so on and so on. And Stanton T. Friedman is one of the most amazing people on this planet right now. He has accomplished so much, and I've seen you, Stanton, in a dozen things, and I saw you receive a major Lifetime Achievement Award at the International UFO Congress a few years back as well. I'm going to bring on my co-host, Karen Christine Patrick, and then we will bring on Stanton T. Friedman. Karen, are you with us? Hello.
Yes, I am. I'm very super excited to be talking to the amazing Stanton Friedman. I just moved recently to New Mexico and was very delighted to find out how close I actually live to Roswell and haven't been there yet. So, of course, he set the stage for so many people to understand what happened at Roswell. So I'm excited to get into that story in a personal way eventually. So it's awesome. Thank you for coming, Stanton.
Okay, and
I'm glad to be here.
Oh, you're there. Okay, it was showing that you were on mute. I'm glad you're here. Welcome to the show. So I want to pass this talking stick to you, Stanton, and you can tell our listeners what you want them to know about you and your work.
Say that again. What I do what? I missed something.
What you want to tell our listeners what you want them to know about yourself and your books and your work.
Oh, well, let's see. How many hours do we have? No.
One. You'll have to give us the Reader's Digest version.
To say that I guess what I want people to know is that none of the arguments made by the nasty, noisy negativists, as I call them, the naysaying newsmen sometimes, or ancient academics, or fossilized physicists, I love alliteration, none of the arguments made against the reality of some UFOs, catch that word some, as intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft stand up under careful scrutiny. And I have a peculiar background, which you gave, but basically when people tell me governments can't keep secrets, I see that all the time from people who have never been involved in keeping secrets. And, Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, said the proof that the government can't keep secrets is how much we know about Bill Clinton's genitalia. How's that for a clever remark? Which has nothing at all to do with it. You know, the proof that the government can keep secrets is that there have been things like the stealth aircraft spent $10 billion in secret to develop it. There are many other examples. And as a matter of fact, it surprises people, I suppose, when I tell them that the NSA, you've all heard of National Security Agency, Mr. Snowden's outfit, if you will, has it took us years to get under a Freedom of Information Act suit against them to release UFO data. At first they said they had it, but they can't release it. It's all classified. And then the rules changed a bit, so they finally released 156 top-secret Umbra UFO documents. There was a little problem. All but one sentence on each page was whited out. And I had people calling me, UFO people, saying, hey, they're not keeping secrets anymore. I say, can you read what's under the whiteout? Well, no, but then they are. And the CIA, it took a lot of action. We got 800 pages of material up through secret. And I pushed a little harder and made a few more letters and so forth. And I finally got some top secret material, top secret Umbra. The only trouble was it was all blacked out. Find 6 words on a page, not very exciting. So I can say truthfully, I had a clearance for 14 years. Secrets are easily kept. I've been a fan, for example, of the Operation Majestic 12 as a group being set up by President Truman. There are 3 genuine documents, and there's dozens of phony documents. And I get people telling me, well, surely those guys, there were 12 people named to be in this super ultra secret group. He said, surely they would have told their wives what they were doing. No way. You never tell your wife anything classified. It's against the law in the first place, and it's stupid in the second place because you don't know what she's going to say. And there's an old line, you can't tell your friends without telling your enemies. There are lots of ears around listening to what's going on in the world. A third place where I come into play with my crazy background, I think I set a record for working on canceled government-sponsored advanced research and development programs. 3 years here, 3 years there, 3 years there. It was a 3-year saga. Every 3 years it changed. But several of those programs, if we wanted to spend the dough, we could go, that's my line, to the stars. And that shocks people. Because they think of dumb old chemical rockets, which can get us to the moon, surely. But the basis of advanced technology is that progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. The future is not an extrapolation of the past. A laser is not a better light bulb. They both produce lights, but there's a big difference. And I get some people who think we're still in the era of Magellan. Remember him, great explorer. Back in 1523, his ship, he didn't make it, but his ship did, took 3 years to go around the planet. So obviously, the fastest you can get around the planet Earth is 3 years, but the space station does it in 95 minutes. It's different technology. It's not just a fast sailing ship. And I worked on fusion. Now, for people who don't realize it, the most important source of energy by far in all the universe, not just the sun, not just our solar system, not in the galaxy, not in all the galaxies, is nuclear fusion. That's what goes on in H-bombs too. But nuclear fusion gives you a way to get to the stars if you want to spend the money. You can kick particles out the back end that have 10 million times as much energy per particle as they can get in a dumb old chemical rocket. Not 10 times, not 10,000, 10 million times. So,
wow.
In the real world, in other words, we already know. We didn't even know. We didn't discover the neutron until 1932, which is kind of funny. And fission and fusion in 1938. And to illustrate that we got to look at the major sources of energy, not the minor ones. A big bomb in 1944, right in the middle of World War II, was a 10-ton blockbuster. 10 tons of dynamite. That's how much energy it released as if it were exploding. 10 tons of dynamite. And it took a big B-29 to carry that bomb. And we dropped a lot of them, and they made a lot of holes in the ground, knocked down a lot of buildings. Now, in 1945, the first atomic bomb, a fission device, released the energy of more than 16,000 tons of dynamite. The first A-bomb. Now, we kept working hard. In 1952, we exploded the first H-bomb, released the energy of 10 million tons TNT of dynamite. 10 million tons. And the Russians outdid us a few years later, 57 million tons. These are mind-boggling numbers, but the reason I mention it, I was involved in a study of fusion propulsion in 1962. And if you want to spend the dough, you can go. So what I'm trying to say is the old notion that we're out here sitting on the Earth, and this is the only solar system, the only planets with life, that's gone by the wayside. And to give you an idea of how much our notions have changed, partly because of the Kepler satellite. This is the one that's looking for planets around stars. And it's so sensitive, it can pick up the flight of a planet in front of its star. It reduces the amount of light coming from the star to us by a tiny, tiny amount, but we can measure that. Well, now we're finding that it appears that on the average, every star has between 1 and 1.6 planets per star. Now, that may not sound like much. I mean, they could have as many as 8 or 9, depending on how you vote for Pluto in our own solar system, or 0. But an average of better than 1 per star. Let's see what that means. Within 50 light years, which is just down the street a little bit, there are 2,000 stars. That means within 100 light years, there are 10,000 stars, and therefore at least 10,000 planets. Now, maybe they all don't have life. It doesn't matter. What if only 10%? That's 1,000. Now, the galaxy, our galaxy, the Milky Way, is 100,000 light years across. And I'm telling you that within 100 light years, there's about 10,000 planets. So all over the place out there. And what people forget is we know every student learns that the nearest star to the sun, Alpha Centauri, is 4.3 light years away. But there are plenty of situations in which the nearest star is much less than 1 light year away from the nearest star to it. In the famous Betty and Barney Hill story, and I think you've talked to Kathleen Marden, she and I did a book, she did most of the work, Captured. Okay, I did the chapter on the star map, and the base stars seem to be Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli. That's the name of the constellation. Reticulum means the net in Latin. I don't speak Latin, but that's what it means anyway.
Where did they get that name for that star? Where does that come from?
Somebody had already named the constellation Reticulum. And the base stars are 2 stars in that same constellation. A constellation is a sort of grouping of stars in one part of the galaxy, wherever you want to look. It's like the Big Dipper is a constellation. Okay. Anyway, with you number the stars with Greek letters. So there's Zeta 1 Reticuli and Zeta 2 Reticuli. These two stars are an eighth of a light year apart. That's 35 times closer than we are to the next star to the sun, Alpha Centauri. So those guys can look at the other one, and the other star is visible all day long. And it's much easier to learn characteristics of the planets around the other star than it is for us, because they're close. And so I presume the closer you have a neighbor, the more likely you are to develop interstellar travel. Doesn't that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
You know a lot about those guys over there. You want to go there. So, and many people will tell you, oh, you're forgetting about Dr. Einstein, Stan. You're a physicist. Don't you remember him? What he said. Mm-hmm. Two important things. You can't go faster than the speed of light. Well, okay. The second thing he said, as you get close to the speed of light, time slows down for the things moving that fast. So let me give you a specific example. At 1G acceleration, and you're withstanding 1G right now because the Earth is pulling on you with 1G. But at 1G, it only takes less than a year to get to the speed of light. But at 99.99% of the speed of light, you can go 37 light years in 6 months pilot time. So you go out, come back, marry your granddaughter's best friend. That's pretty neat. This is real.
Yeah,
now, in case people think, what's he talking about, close to the speed of light? That Large Hadron Collider over in Switzerland, which we hear about from time to time. Yes. The particles that they accelerate there go 99.9999% of the speed of light. So we know something about what happens at the speed of light. So what I'm saying is, it is not out of the picture that by the time my great-grandson is grown up, we will be sending off ships to the stars. If we don't kill ourselves first, you understand. But that's a different question. You know, we physicists don't do anything about that, it says here. So what I'm trying to say is, for our kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, it's a new time. We're not alone. We're not isolated. We know how to go there if we want to spend the money. And look, the government spent lots of money on advanced programs. When I was working on nuclear airplanes, believe it or not, we had a serious effort going in 1958. Now, when I say serious effort, I was at General Electric, a serious company. And that year, we spent $100 million. We employed 3,500 people, of whom 1,100 were engineers and scientists. I call that a serious effort. We're not talking about 3 professors and 20 grad students, in other words. Now, we did not fly a nuclear airplane. They canceled the program. What am I going to do? But for those who think he's crazy, he's a nuclear guy, come on, what can you do with nuclear energy? Well, the Navy does something that seems incredible. They send submarines that can go around the world underwater without coming to the surface. It takes a while. We also have nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. Now, there's a fun, and it's a fun game, because nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, these are real, can operate for 18 years without refueling. Think about that for a minute. You're a ship captain. Normally you have to worry about where are the tankers. If I go fast, I use up all my fuel, and I use it in a hurry. Where am I going to get the gas? Nuclear-powered carrier might carry 75 little airplanes. They can operate for, 2 hours without refueling. But we have carriers today that can go 18 years without refueling. And you think about it, a carrier is a darn big aircraft, big ship, you know.
Right.
So what I'm saying is we have to keep up with what we've been learning. And all of it goes in the direction of saying, what's the big deal about aliens coming here? Now, what I also find is that most people aren't aware of the large-scale scientific studies that have been done. And they look at me, there aren't any. It's just lights in the sky, nothing to get excited about. Well, biggest study ever done for the Air Force, back when the Air Force was in the UFO business. In 1955, Project Blue Book, Special Report number 14. Project Blue Book was the overall name given to the Air Force effort to look into UFO sightings. And it ended in 1969. I'll talk about that in a minute. But Blue Book Special Report 14 looked at 3,201 sightings, did a quality evaluation. The report, Special Report number 14, had over 100 charts, tables, graphs, and maps, chock full of data, except that they didn't distribute the report. They put out a press release. This was scientific work done for the United States Air Force now. We're not talking about a hobby group off to the side. Mm-hmm. The press release had this quote in it from the Secretary of the Air Force. You can't get a higher authority in the Air Force than that. Donald Quarles was his name. And I quarrel with Quarles, believe me, because he said, on the basis of this study, we believe that no objects such as those popularly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. Even the unknown 3% could have been explained as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete data had been available. That's what he said. The trouble is, I had the report when I found a copy at the University of California, Berkeley Library. I don't know how it got there, but I was glad that it did, because it got me started. What I found was the unknowns weren't 3%. They're 21.5%. That's not a rounding off error. They found that the better the quality of the sighting, the more likely to be unexplainable. They found that the probability that the unknowns, the only ones we're interested in. Remember, the question isn't, are all UFOs alien spacecraft? The question is, are any? Which is a very different question. They found that the probability that the unknowns were just misknowns was less than 1%. So I've checked my audiences, and certainly fewer than 1% have read Blue Book Special Report 14, even though it's the biggest official study ever done. The University of Colorado study, the Condon Report is called. Many people say, well, that said there wasn't anything to flying saucers. Well, that's what Dr. Condon said. But if you look at his report, according to a special UFO subcommittee of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, the world's largest group of space scientists, they set up a special committee, and they wouldn't let me on the committee because I had already taken a stand. I'm a member of the AIA, but I couldn't be on their committee. They looked at the evidence. They looked at the Condon report. It said one could come to the opposite conclusions from Dr. Condon based on the data in the report, because 30% of the sightings could not be explained. Now, we're all familiar with the fact that if you're looking for a drug to cure a disease, the fact that 95% of what you look at doesn't work doesn't matter. You say, I'm sick, give me one of the other 5%, right?
Right.
I'm a nuclear guy. There's only a couple of isotopes out of many hundreds that are fissionable. But that's what you use when you build a nuclear reactor. You know, the basketball coach, he says there's practically no 7-footers around. But I'll take one. You guys keep the midgets. One is enough. You know, my team will do well with one.
Stanton, this is great. This is all wonderful, and I love the. I could hear you. I could listen to you for hours. We're actually like about almost halfway through the show already. I'm really curious that you're working with Kathleen Marden, and how do the experiencers and here it is all these years later, these experiencers are having contact, and so how do we fit this into the reality of these people like back in the 50s and 60s that were just trying to discredit things? Now we have an overwhelming amount of information that's coming out from millions of experiencers, and to connect that to what your background. Is that part of what your new book is about? Can you tell us about where the research is now?
What our focus is on showing that many of the noisiest negativists have been lying, been guilty of massive misrepresentation, have intentionally avoided telling the truth, and we will cite chapter and verse. Kathy and I have gone to archives. You know, we go look at the original documents. It's not secondhand, thirdhand. A says, B said, C said, D said. That's not what we're talking about. We're looking at what A wrote. You know, and so I'm not a psychiatrist. I can't tell you why these guys do what they do, whether they're being paid to do it. I mean, people forget disinformation has been a part of warfare for a very long time. Think of the Trojan horse, for example. You know, and there have been many other examples. In World War II, we made a very great effort to get Hitler to think that we were going to land at Calais in France rather than at Normandy. And the generals, when we did land, the generals said, "Call up the reserves, call up the..." Hitler said, no. They're really landing down there, not over here. We can't waste our troops over here because they're just going to land over there. He was wrong. We fooled them. And some of it was strangely, we put, how will I put it, carefully crafted letters in the jacket of an officer who had died and dropped the body off Spain, knowing the Spanish would give them to Hitler. And anybody reading that carefully as an intelligence agent would say, son of a gun, they're going to be landing over at Calais. We did everything we could to fool them, and it was very important that we did. So lying officially on the part of government. Well, when the first atom bomb was exploded in New Mexico, Trinity site, it was seen by a lot of people from as far away as 100 miles. Pretty spectacular, fireball and all. And people were calling the sheriff's office, what happened? You know, New Mexico is a very low population state, so when something spectacular happens, what's going on? And after a couple of days, they put out a press release. An ammunition dump had blown up, and fortunately, nobody was injured. That was 2 weeks before we exploded the bomb on Hiroshima.
Wow.
And then the truth came out that it was actually a test of that new bomb. And, you know, you talk about secrecy. A good example, the man in charge of the Manhattan Project to develop the atomic bomb, General Leslie Groves, and somebody in his office called Mrs. Groves, he worked at the Pentagon, called Mrs. Groves and told her the general wanted her to listen to the radio at noon today. This was August the 6th, 1945. And she listened, and they told the story that we had just dropped this incredible new atomic bomb on Japan. The war was going to be over soon, and went on, you know, rhapsodizing about how important this was. The last line of the program was, the person in charge of the program was General Leslie Groves. That's when she found out what her husband had been doing for the previous 3 years. She thought the reason for calling her was because their son was going to be going to the Pacific invasion of Japan. They weren't looking forward to that. And so that, and then this bomb drops at the end that it was her husband who had directed this whole business. That proves that you can keep secrets, is what I'm saying.
Right. Well, you
so,
think that you could look at the disinformation and actually get information from the disinformation. You know, what are they saying instead of, yeah.
When you see people lying enough about the same thing, and you can prove they're lying, then you begin to get suspicious, don't you? Why did he say that? You know, when it isn't true.
What are some of the lies you're catching in your new book? Or is there anything you can share with us, like a teaser?
Well, Dr. Condon said that he was sure that nobody could travel here from someplace else for 10,000 years. Now, what possible basis he had for that, I don't know, but it isn't in his book. It was a stupid thing to say. Philip Klass was the noisiest negativist of them all. He was senior avionics editor for Aviation Week and Space Technology, and back in the 60s he got interested in UFOs. He wrote 3 anti-UFO books, constantly was saying there's nothing to it. And just to give you a specific example about how bad these guys were, the Majestic 12 documents, very controversial. Very simply, apparently President Truman, if you believe the important document is real, established a group called Majestic 12 in late 1947 to deal with the Roswell crash and the whole UFO question. And we found one document that mentioned the National Security Council, and the kicker was that he said, and he wrote me a letter, Stan, maybe you didn't notice that this one document, the Cutler-Twining memo it's called, Bobby Cutler was Ike's national security advisor. The Cutler-Twining memo was obviously a fraud because it's typed in the large pica type. But the National Security Council always used the elite type, and I got 9 documents to prove it. I challenge you to get any genuine documents done in the same size and style type, and I'll give you $100 each up to a maximum of 10. And I immediately went to my files and found 20 that were done in the large pica type. They didn't all meet his criteria. He had other things. They got to be signed by somebody within a certain time frame and blah, blah, blah. I was playing with him because I was planning on going to the Eisenhower Library. He credited me okay with 2 and thought he had me. Well, I went to the Eisenhower Library, found 14 more. These all met all of his criteria. I made copies, sent him the copies, and an invoice for $1,000, 10 at $100 each. And he paid me.
Oh,
and
good.
He told everybody about challenging me, but nobody about paying me. And his papers at the American Philosophical Society Library. There's no Stanton Friedman file. We corresponded for 20 years. I wonder why he didn't. And, the real kicker here is, here he's talking about the papers of the National Security Council. He had never been at the Eisenhower Library before or after. I've spent weeks there. But it's typical of the intellectual bankruptcy of the pseudoscience of anti-ufology. I like the way that sounds.
Right.
So that we talk about Phil at length in the book, I should say,
well,
based on his papers.
I had a run in with him in 1989 when I was the head of the Penn State UFO discussion group, and so it's interesting. He was reaching out to everybody. I mean, I was nothing. I was just two young ladies that were teaching a group at adult ed at night, and he went out of his way to attack us as well. So he was a character.
Look, there's 4 major rules for debunkers. What the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. If you can't attack the data, attack the people. And do your research by proclamation. Investigation is too much trouble. And don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. Now, if you stick to those things, there's nothing to flying saucers, but too bad the real world doesn't work that way. So I'm glad you knew about, I'm not glad you knew about him because he was a pain in the neck.
He was. He sent one of his agents to our weekly group at Penn State University. So we had to deal with a debunker right in our group every week. So anyway, we dealt with him. It was kind of interesting, but I didn't know near as much as what I know now, and I was trying to deal with the major debunker and his colleague they're highly trained, and they were just trying to make us all look like fools. But it was a public group, so I kick him out. It was like the university thing was free, so what could I do but deal with it? Karen, did you want to say something to ask a question to Stanton?
Oh my gosh, I have got way more questions than we have time, but I've just been enjoying this thoroughly. Stories of sending the debunkers back into their bunkers, because I've had to deal with that in my anomaly groups. I had to deal with it today because I had people talking about TIMPAT, and I'm like, this is an anomaly group. You came into an anomaly group, not a debunker group. So I have to deal with that. But I have a burning question because yes. I work with Dr. Ken Johnson. I've been getting into the debunkery things that happened during the Apollo mission years, and of course they had to have procedures to control information. And I've been learning about Carl Sagan, some of the things that he worked with there, and also Dr. Thornton Page, who was
yes.
a mucky muck in that. And oh yes, and he now in the autobiography I've been working with Ken Johnson, the story is that Ken was brought to the inner sanctum to get some film to show to some scientists, and there literally was some anomalous stuff that was seen on the film, and Ken was very excited. He was going to show it to the other engineers the next day, and of course when he got the film the second time from the vault, that part was edited out. And it's he was a big NASA guy. Ken was all NASA all the time. He loved the organization. But that was a real moment of truth for him, is that they are definitely going to control the information, and
yep.
that information never came out, basically. And, of course, I've talked to Donna Hare as well, who was one of the people where they were, smudging and painting over, various things. But Carl Sagan got very interesting to me because he made some statements about the idea that we would possibly find like rectilinear square figures on the back of the moon. I think he's like almost pressing it, to say that, because when we kind of found some of those things, and those were dismissed as some kind of natural phenomenon that we don't understand that makes square craters, right?
Well,
and
Carl and I were classmates at the University of Chicago for 3 years.
Oh, fantastic!
Wow.
Yeah.
And I visited him a year before he died.
Yeah.
And it was friendly because we knew each other. We were in exactly the same classes for 3 years. And I was speaking at Cornell, so the guy brought me to Carl's house. We had coffee, and his wife was there, and so forth. And we had some follow-up correspondence afterward. And he had said in two of his books, there are interesting sightings that aren't reliable. There are reliable sightings that aren't interesting, but there are no interesting and reliable sightings, which sounds pretty profound. The only trouble is he gives no reference, cites no data, and it's totally untrue. In this Blue Book Special Report 14, they did a reliability evaluation of all the sightings, and the more reliable, the more likely to be unexplainable, which is just what you'd expect if you're dealing with a real phenomena. Carl, also, how shall I put this? I have to give him credit for doing more than anybody else to get people to think about life in outer space. The only trouble is that SETI has blown it. SETI is supposed to stand for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. I say it's silly effort to investigate, SET. Well, because it starts from the wrong place. It assumes nobody's coming here. It assumes that there's somebody out there is sending out signals using technology that's appropriate to us.
Yeah.
I mean, are they sending AM or FM? But let's remember something. The neighborhood's at least 4 billion years old. And yet, our first long-distance radio signal reception was dear old Marconi in 1901. And what he did violated what the physicists were saying was reality. Kathleen and I have a book out called Science Was Wrong. And we talk about this story. That is that, so many instances of smart people saying stupid things. And one of them was that, look, Stan, the Earth is round, or Marconi would have, somebody would have said this to Marconi. The Earth is round. So if you send a radio signals travel in straight lines. So you run into the Earth. Can't do anything about it. So about the most you can get is 250 miles. Well, Marconi was sending signals out, and he had ships at sea that he knew where they were, and they were getting the signals. And so, much to the dismay of the nasty, noisy negativists, they would, at first would deny that he had actually received a signal. It was in Newfoundland, incidentally, and they're very proud of that. It turns out the reason why you could do that is there was something we didn't know. I mean, it's hard to believe that there are things we didn't know, but there were some. One of them was that there was an ionosphere up there, an electrically conducting gas, if you will, layer of the atmosphere. And because it was electrically conducting, it reflected the radio waves. Now, we didn't find out that there even was an ionosphere for 20 years after Marconi. And that's why I say that technological progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. The things we're going to learn about that we don't know. When X-rays were first reported, prominent English scientists said, that's a hoax. There's nothing around that can penetrate, through your hand and you can see the bones in the pictures and stuff. That's nonsense. It's a hoax. Well, it wasn't a hoax. He didn't know about X-rays, and he didn't want to allow room for things he didn't know. And the book, Science Was Wrong, I should mention my website, www.stantonfriedman.com. That book is on it, and if you get a book from me, you get my signature and Kathy's signature. And that's true for Captured as well. That's one thing you won't get on Amazon. You won't get our signatures.
Wonderful.
But let me give you another example. The British Astronomer Royal, and there is no higher position in astronomy than that, in 1956 told Time magazine, space travel is utter bilge. Who's going to pay for it? What good would it do? What we need is better tools for astronomy. 1 year later, Sputnik went up, and the area of science that was most benefited by space travel was astronomy.
Yeah.
The Hubble telescope, and the Kepler, and a whole zillion, and there's a whole bunch of things there. So smart people often get accustomed to thinking that they know all there is to know because nobody's criticizing them. Sometimes, however, some of us do criticize them.
Yeah.
Well, there are many examples of this, and there should be a course taught at every school, I think, about failures of advanced science because they didn't know what all was going on.
Which would give young people a lot of hope who go, in school and feel like the professors are telling them everything's been discovered, and they want to make some kind of break in science, and they have to kind of wait for the chairhead to pass on or retire maybe before they can bring new ideas in. Yeah, but I found those that particular statement very subjective because who says what's interesting, And the other famous Sagan statement that gets thrown around is that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and I dug down in there. Everyone attributed it to Sagan, but it actually was another gentleman, Marcello Truzzi, and he has this wonderful word pseudo-skepticism that I learned about. And that really helped me because I really, when I looked at what this, my debunkers in my groups were saying, I decided that their budget had been cut there in the debunker, central, because their statements were, like you said, the grandiose, just unprovable statements that's like, something anyone would say. This is a statement like it's true, but they don't. It makes us people in anomaly groups really have to do our homework because we have to be smarter than them because we have to actually show the data because they're not doing that or they're lying about it.
There's a basic rule.
Yeah.
There's a basic rule, and that should be to have facts in hand before putting mouth in gear. There was another scientist who said men would never go to the moon. There are other, there's a whole long list of these false pronouncements. And it's true in biology. It's true in other things. Who would have predicted that you'd have antibiotics, for example? Somebody pursued the truth, searching for evidence, not presuming that he knew all there was to know. Is it possible that there's something going on that I don't understand? Yeah! And it certainly happens with UFOs and with government cover-ups. I call it a cosmic Watergate, and some people won't like that, but all you got to do is look at your first 100 NSA top-secret umbrella UFO documents and all whited out except for one sentence. I literally had people in ufology calling me when we got those documents saying, "See, Stan, they're not covering up anymore." I said, "Can you read under the whiteout?" Well, no, but they released it. Yeah. I get people thinking that, well, you get these blacked out documents and you get rid of the black on the surface, and underneath you'll find what you want. They don't send you original documents. They send you Xeroxes. There's nothing under the blacked out stuff or the whited out stuff. It's really amazing the lengths to which the debunkers will go. And one of the areas, for example, is that debunker Phil Klass said in one of his books that the ratio of believers to non-believers is about 1 to 11. And yet if you look at the polls, it's more like 4 to 3. Believers over non-believers, at least. And look, I've checked some of my audiences. And when somebody insists that I do that, I had a full house at University of Manitoba. And one of the first questions was, how about polling this audience? And I had shown some Gallup poll data, which showed the greater the education, more likely to believe in flying saucers, and believers outnumbered non-believers, and so forth. And the guy asked me to poll the audience. I said, well, I stick my neck out. I don't ask my audience. Well, I don't think the audience would mind. Everybody clapped. Okay. I'll ask 2 questions. The first will be, how many of you think no UFOs are alien spacecraft? And then how many of you think some UFOs are alien spacecraft? Fewer than 10% said nowhere, and 90% said somewhere. Wow. That's pretty overwhelming odds, And, well, as an example of that, I've given over 700 lectures. I've had 11 hecklers, and 2 of them were drunk. And you get that many if you talk about sports, religion, politics, whatever. And it is interesting. In one class, professor cooperated, polled the kids, but vote with your hands, but with your eyes closed, so you don't know what other people are saying. 80% of the kids in the class thought most people didn't believe in UFOs. 80% of them did.
Wow.
That's
that isolationist. That's that isolationist feeling that believers and the believers and non-believers. That's kind of a duality thing. Somewhere in the middle is the experiencer. So part of why they maybe switched over to being a believer, and we've talked to so many people in our experiencer shows that they were skeptical, just didn't believe it, and then they actually had an experience that they couldn't explain, and they had to really think about it and count themselves in the believer camp more or less, but now it's because they've had an experience that they're trying to understand.
Or they know somebody who they trust.
Yes, exactly.
And that's one of the myths that, for example, most pilots are afraid to report their sightings because they feel threatened. They'll lose their jobs, et cetera. And no airline wants to be known as the airline with planes flown by people who see flying saucers.
Right.
So there is a group called NARCAP, NARCAP. That stands for, let me see, National Association for Reports of Anomalous Phenomena. I've got some word in there mixed up, but National Association for Reports of Anomalous Phenomena. This is for pilots. And they are guaranteed anonymity. And Dr. Richard Haynes is their chief scientist. And they have collected thousands of reports. And it's a relief to the pilots to be able to tell somebody. I had a guy call me the other day. He'd seen me on a show, and he wanted to tell me about what he saw. He was a Navy pilot. And it happens quite often. I'm not surprised. And the thing is that people will talk to you if they think you're going to treat them decently. Give them a fair hearing. And I don't worry about laughter or the debunkers. A typical, I have to laugh when I think about it. At the end of a lecture in State University of New York, SUNY Cortland, there's a whole bunch of SUNY State University of New York branches. Anyway, finished the lecture, and the first guy up in the question and answer period, I call on him. I don't know what he's going to say or who he is, well-dressed. And he says, I've never heard so much nonsense in one night in my life. Great way to start, Right. So I said, could you be a bit more specific, please, sir? You said that Betty and Barney Hill were taken to Zeta Reticuli and back in 2 hours. I said, no, sir. What I said was they were taken on board a craft. The craft didn't go anywhere. They were on board the craft for 2 hours. You said that, and there were two more you said that's, which were full of baloney, and I had to correct both of them politely. Then someone in the audience yells out, how about taking some sensible questions? This guy gets up and walks out. And so I said, I'll take your question, but who was that? Obviously, I rubbed him the wrong way. He was a professor of physics. He didn't hear what I had to say. He knew what the answer was before I started. I mean, there's a big difference between saying they went to someplace 39 light years away and back in 2 hours, and they were taken on board a craft for 2 hours and didn't go anywhere. So
some people only want to hear what they want to hear. They don't listen to what's actually being said. Yeah.
So one has to be prepared for that, but not surprised when it happens. And like I said, even when Carl Sagan doesn't account for his opinion, you can't be surprised when smart people say stupid things. It's part of the story. And our book, Kathleen Marden and I, and she did most of the work on Captured. We have people who have misrepresented the Hill case like you wouldn't believe. And you try to figure out, where did they get that nonsense from? Kathy has listened to all of the... And I just read a critique of UFOs from somebody who wrote a long article debunking everything. Oh, she didn't like the McMinnville, Oregon UFO conference, and then jumped onto Roswell, and then jumped onto the Betty and Barney Hill case. And she got everything wrong about everything. It was truly incredible how far off one can be when you know what's going on in the area, as I did in these three cases, certainly. And these guys get published, as if they were putting the gospel out in front of the audience, and they're not. And I wish he had tried.
Imagine 100 years from now what the history will end up looking like after these people get a hold of it. So how does anybody ever know the truth?
Be easy.
We got like 6 minutes left. I want to cover your conferences that you're going to, and your so you're going to Contact in the Desert, and that's the first weekend in June.
That's right.
What's your focus there? What's going on there?
My paper is going to be, let's see, I think a new view of the cosmos and star travel, yes, things like that. And 2 weeks later, I'll be speaking with George Norrie on a stage in St. Louis in a Johnny Carson kind of arrangement. And then after that, I'll be going to Brantford, Ontario. I am a Canadian as well as an American, so I've got to share myself with both sides of the border.
Great, yeah.
And Alien Contact Expo, that's going to be.
I'll be at both of those, yeah.
Well, we'll have fun. I was at both of those last year, as a matter of fact, the Contact in the Desert and Brantford. And, boy, there were a lot of people in the desert. I'll also then I'll go to Roswell.
Oh,
it probably was, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be at Roswell. Yeah, my group is going to be at Roswell. Yeah.
Well,
that's great,
because Roswell is fun. And this gal who wrote this very negative article, she made it sound like the only thing that happens in Roswell is the early July conference. It doesn't mention that the museum is open year-round, and it's one of the biggest tourist attractions in New Mexico.
Yeah, we're visiting that before the conference because we'll be trying to have Mr. Ken Johnson's works put in there as the eyewitness to some important things. And I'm just dying to go because I moved near here and realized how far I was, and I was like, oh, my gosh, we've got to go. It's like Mecca for people into UFOs. So we're excited, and I'm glad to be at the conference. That's great.
Well, one thing people don't realize, and the gal who wrote this very negative article didn't, seemingly, is Roswell isn't on the way to anywhere, as I'm sure you found out when you looked at how to get there. And if people are there, it's because they want to be there. And they're 200 miles from Albuquerque, from Amarillo, from El Paso. It's nowheresville, if you will. But I see people complaining about, they have parades and costume contests and stuff like that. Well, you'd be amazed at how many people bring their families there for their summer trip, for the July event. And if you're going to bring your kids, you got to have something for them to get excited about and to do.
Yeah.
And otherwise people won't come. And so I get a kick out of being in the parade, to tell you the truth, and the same at McMinnville.
I've been to that one, too. That one's fun, too, yes.
Yes, it is. But you'll notice they don't have a museum. They don't have something that attracts people all year round. Hundreds of thousands of people go every year to Roswell. They come from all over the world. And I've spoken in 18 countries, and everywhere I go, they ask me about Roswell. So,
great.
And they have that library and research center that they've been building, too, so there's books and, I think, a very large repository of material. Yes,
it does. A lot of people donate their materials when they can see the Grim Reaper coming. Want to do something useful. Well, Roswell is a very special place, and many people may not realize this, but the group that was the military group at the time of the Roswell Incident was the 509th Composite Bomb Group. Okay. When Lyndon Johnson was elected president because New Mexico didn't vote for him, he closed the base and moved it to Texas. And so it's only fitting that Roswell benefits from all the people who realize the government's been lying to them.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's great. At least somebody got something out of it. Okay, Stanton, we're just about out of time. How do people reach you again? What's your website? And
my website is www.stantonfriedman.com, and you can use PayPal to order everything. It lists books and DVDs, and the whole schmear is right there. And it gives you my phone number. I don't give that out over the years so that we don't get deluge with phone calls, while I'm doing programs. But I'm reachable. There. My email address is there, and I like to hear from people because people are the source of information.
They are.
And,
so go over there and buy Stanton's books and videos and stuff and support Stanton Friedman. And thank you so much, Stanton and Karen, for joining us today. We are out of time. Much love and blessings and aloha. And do come to Contact in the Desert first weekend, 4 days in June. Aloha. Farewell.
Aloha.
Bye-bye.
thanks
Bye-bye.
much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have you heard? Metro by T-Mobile now includes Amazon Prime. Yes, enjoy the best of shopping and entertainment, movies, TV shows, music, free shipping, and much more. All included for just $40 per line for 3 lines. All on the T-Mobile network. Discover the smarter way. Metro by T-Mobile. That's genius. One offer per account. Offer subject to change. $12.99 per month value. Offer valid for new Amazon Prime members. Metro customers may notice reduced speeds versus some T-Mobile customers. Video at 480p. Capable device required. See store for details and terms and conditions.